Jasmine Washington stands frozen at gate B-17, staring at the shredded pieces of her passport fluttering to the ground. The white gate agent, Richard Bailey, smugly announces, "Looks like you won't be going anywhere today." A deafening announcement, Flight 2357 to Paris has been canceled. Chaos erupts among passengers. Before we dive into this shocking story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity at airports and everywhere else. Now let's find out how one woman's nightmare at the airport changed airline policy forever. The day had started with such promise. At 5:30 a.m., Jasmine Washington's alarm chimed softly in her elegant Baltimore apartment. She had barely slept, excitement and anxiety tangling together in her mind. Today wasn't just any travel day. It represented years of sacrifice, research, and breaking barriers. Dr. Jasmine Washington, at 35, had become one of the youngest neurosurgeons at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The International Medical Conference in Paris awaited her keynote presentation on her groundbreaking neural regeneration technique that could help paralyzed patients regain mobility. She would be representing not just her hospital, but becoming a visible example of Black excellence in a field where people who looked like her were still woefully underrepresented. As she carefully packed her presentation materials, her phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from her mother, Elaine. "Baby girl, you all set for your big day?" Elaine's face appeared framed by silver-streaked hair, eyes sparkling with unmistakable pride. "Almost, Mom. Just double-checking everything," Jasmine replied, adjusting her crisp white blouse in the mirror. "Your father would have been so proud," Elaine said softly. "Remember what he always told you." To be twice as good, Jasmine finished a familiar mantra in their household. Her late father, a high school science teacher who never got the chance to pursue his own medical dreams, had instilled this reality in her early. Because the world will only give you half the credit. That's right. But look at you now. You're 10 times as good, and they can't ignore that anymore, Elaine said with fierce pride. You're carrying all of us with you. After promising to call once she landed in Paris, Jasmine ended the call and surveyed her suitcase. Inside lay carefully selected professional outfits, her presentation materials, and a small photo of her father that traveled with her to every conference. She tucked her passport and boarding pass into her purse, checking them twice. Her ride to Baltimore, Washington International Airport, arrived at 7:00 a.m. The driver, a middle-aged white man, initially walked past her to the neighboring apartment door, despite her clearly waiting with luggage, assuming the doctor couldn't be his passenger. It was a small slight, one of dozens she experienced weekly, the kind that individually could be dismissed, but collectively wore away at one's sense of belonging. "BWI Airport, please," she said crisply, after correcting him, focusing on the day ahead rather than the familiar sting. At the airport, the security line split into two roughly equal queues. Jasmine noticed a pattern developing: white passengers predominantly directed to the right lane, moving swiftly, while she and other minorities were frequently diverted left for random additional screening. When it was her turn, the TSA agent studied her ID with unusual scrutiny. "Purpose of your travel to Paris?" The agent asked a question Jasmine noticed hadn't been posed to the three travelers ahead of her. "Medical conference. I'm presenting research," she answered, maintaining the pleasant, non-threatening demeanor she'd perfected over years of similar interactions. "You're a doctor." The agent's surprise was barely concealed. Neurosurgeon Jasmine corrected gently, used to the assumption that she might be a nurse or technician. After clearing security and the additional random screening that somehow always seemed to find her, Jasmine headed toward the terminal's coffee shop. There she spotted a familiar face, Dr. Raymond Turner, a white colleague from her hospital, also attending the conference. "Jasmine, all ready for the big presentation." Raymond waved her over, already settled with his coffee and breakfast. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, joining him after ordering her own drink. "You breezed through security fast," she remarked casually. Raymond shrugged. "Barely had to stop. Pre-check is amazing. You should get it." "I have it," Jasmine said, simply letting the implications hang in the air. Raymond's momentary discomfort showed he understood. Well, he recovered quickly. The Paris Conference Committee couldn't stop talking about your research when we had the planning call. You're going to be the star of this event." As they parted ways to head to their respective gates, somehow on different flights, despite the same destination and purpose, Jasmine felt the familiar duality of her existence, exceptional in her field, yet constantly reminded of how society viewed her first as black, second as a woman, and only third as a doctor. The weight of representation sat heavily on her shoulders as she headed toward Gate B17. Little did she know that her carefully planned journey was about to be derailed in ways she couldn't imagine, and that Gate B17 would become the stage for a confrontation that would eventually reach millions. Jasmine arrived at Gate B17 with plenty of time before boarding. The Paris-bound flight was scheduled to depart at 11:30 a.m., and the gate area was gradually filling with passengers, business travelers buried in laptops, excited tourists chattering about Parisian cafes, and a few families corralling energetic children. Behind the counter stood Richard Bailey, a 42-year-old gate agent whose navy uniform was immaculately pressed, contrasting sharply with the permanent downward turn of his mouth. 17 years into a career he had once thought would be temporary, Bailey's ambitions for management had been repeatedly passed over. Each rejection had calcified something inside him, building resentment that he rarely acknowledged, even to himself. Jasmine observed Bailey's interactions as the line inched forward. An elderly Asian couple received curt responses to their questions about the flight. A Latino businessman was questioned about his carry-on dimensions, despite it clearly fitting the airline's sizer. Yet when a blonde woman approached with nearly identical questions, as the Asian couple Bailey's demeanor transformed, smiling, offering extra information about the in-flight menu, even joking about Paris weather. When Jasmine finally reached the counter, Bailey's smile vanished as if it had never existed. "Boarding pass and passport," he stated, flatly extending his hand without making eye contact. Jasmine provided both items pristine and organized, as everything in her life. Bailey took her documents and immediately frowned, turning the passport over multiple times, holding it up to the light and scrutinizing every page with exaggerated care. "Is something wrong?" Jasmine asked, maintaining her professional composure. "This passport?" Bailey began letting the statement hang ominously. "When was it issued?" 3 years ago, Jasmine replied. "It's valid until 2028. Bailey's eyes narrowed. "It looks different somehow." He ran his fingers over the embossed cover. "The texture seems off." Jasmine blinked, caught off guard. Her passport was a standard-issue U.S. passport, identical to millions of others. "I assure you, it's authentic. I've traveled internationally with it multiple times." "I'll need to verify this," Bailey said, turning to his computer terminal. He typed something, frowned at the screen, then typed again, his frown deepening performatively. Behind Jasmine, a line was forming. She glanced back apologetically and noticed a white woman, later identified as Amelia Johnson, clutching a passport that appeared identical to hers, watching the interaction with growing discomfort. "System's flagging some issues," Bailey claimed, though his monitor was angled away from passengers. "We'll need additional verification." Bailey signaled to a colleague, a younger man named Tyler, who approached with visible reluctance. "What do you think of this passport?" Bailey asked, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Tyler glanced at the passport, then at Jasmine, then back at the document. "Looks standard to me," he said with a shrug. "Look closer," Bailey insisted, lowering his voice. "The photo." Tyler hesitated, caught between professional integrity and confrontation. "It matches her," he finally said, nodding toward Jasmine, before retreating to his position, clearly wanting no part in whatever was unfolding. By now, Jasmine's heart was pounding, though her face remained composed, a skill honed through countless microaggressions in hospital boardrooms and operating theaters. "Is there a specific concern I can address?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. "Where are you headed to Paris for?" Bailey countered, ignoring her question. "I'm attending a medical conference. I'm a neurosurgeon presenting research," Jasmine explained, opening her purse to retrieve her conference credentials. "A neurosurgeon," Bailey repeated with unmistakable skepticism. And this is your passport. It wasn't a question, but a challenge. The implication hung in the air, heavy and familiar. You don't look like what I think a neurosurgeon should look like. You don't look like this passport could be legitimate. From the corner of her eye, Jasmine noticed a tall black man in a supervisor's uniform watching from nearby. Terrence Wright had been with the airline for 20 years and had seen this scene play out too many times before. His expression revealed nothing as he observed, but his presence registered with Jasmine as both a potential ally and a reminder of the complicated dynamics at play. "Yes, this is my passport," Jasmine confirmed, maintaining eye contact with Bailey. "If there's a technical issue with verification, perhaps a supervisor could assist." Bailey's jaw tightened. "We have procedures for suspected document fraud." Jasmine interrupted her composure, finally cracking. "There is absolutely nothing fraudulent about my passport." A few passengers had stopped their conversations to watch the escalating situation. Amelia Johnson, the white woman behind Jasmine, stepped slightly forward. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Is there a problem with passports today? Should I be concerned about mine?" Bailey's demeanor shifted instantly. "No, ma'am, I'm sure yours is perfectly fine. This is a specific situation." The contrast was so stark, so blatant, that audible murmurs rippled through the gate area. Jasmine felt a flush of heat rising from her neck to her face, not embarrassment, but the controlled anger of someone facing a painfully familiar injustice. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," Jasmine stated firmly, no longer a request but a demand. Bailey's eyes narrowed. The gate counter that had given him a modicum of power throughout his stagnant career now became a battleground. "Ma'am, if you continue to be aggressive, I'll have to call security." Aggressive Jasmine echoed her voice, rising despite her best intentions to stay calm. "I'm standing here calmly asking valid questions about why my legitimate passport is being questioned." Several phones had emerged from the crowd, now recording the interaction. Bailey noticed, and something in his expression changed a flicker of uncertainty, quickly replaced by doubling down. "Security to Gate B17, he said into his radio, making eye contact with Jasmine as he did so. "Passenger situation." The confrontation had crossed a threshold from which there would be no easy return. As two security officers began making their way through the terminal toward Gate B17, Jasmine stood her ground, aware that what happened next would be determined not just by her actions, but by a system designed with people like her as an afterthought at best. The stage was set for a moment that would soon ripple far beyond Gate B17. The air at Gate B17 crackled with tension. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Conversation hushed to murmurs, as everyone sensed the escalating situation between Dr. Jasmine Washington and gate agent Richard Bailey. The arrival of airport security officers Derek Maxwell and Craig Peters only amplified the tension. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Maxwell asked, addressing his question to Bailey rather than Jasmine. "Suspected fraudulent documentation," Bailey replied, promptly. Passenger became confrontational when questioned. Jasmine took a deep breath, centering herself. As a surgeon, she had learned to remain clear-headed during crisis. This skill now served her in an unexpected context. "Officers, I'm Dr. Jasmine Washington, traveling to Paris for a medical conference. My passport is perfectly legitimate. I've traveled internationally multiple times with it." She reached into her bag and produced her hospital ID card, medical license, and conference invitation. "I have multiple forms of identification that confirm my identity." Officer Peters glanced at the documents, then at Bailey. "Seems in order to me." Bailey's face tightened. "The system is flagging it," he insisted, though his computer screen wasn't visible to anyone else. "Look at the hologram on page 3. It's off." "The hologram looks standard," Officer Maxwell said, after examining the passport. Bailey's fingers gripped the passport, tighter knuckles whitening. "There's a protocol for suspected document fraud. I need to check the passport against our database." He turned to his computer, typing rapidly while muttering under his breath. The waiting passengers watched, as if viewing a play, the stillness broken only by the soft, electronic whir of phones recording the scene. Sir Jasmine addressed Bailey with forced calmness. "I understand you have procedures, but this is a valid U.S. passport. If your system is showing an error, perhaps there's a technical issue that needs—" "The database shows no match," Bailey announced, triumphantly cutting her off mid-sentence. "That's impossible," Jasmine countered. "I checked in with that exact passport earlier today." "The system doesn't lie," Bailey insisted. An older white man with silver hair stepped forward from the crowd. "Young man, I believe there's been a misunderstanding here," he said, in the authoritative tone of someone used to being listened to. Later, passengers would identify him as Benjamin Crawford, a 65-year-old retired attorney. "I travel internationally monthly, and I've never seen this level of scrutiny for a standard U.S. passport." "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't your concern," Bailey replied, his voice strained. "It becomes the concern of everyone when we witness injustice," Crawford responded, raising his phone to make it clear he was recording. Bailey's face flushed crimson. The situation was slipping beyond his control. More passengers had their phones out now. Officer Peters shifted uncomfortably, sensing the public relations disaster unfolding. "Let me speak to your supervisor," Jasmine requested again, her voice firm but controlled. Instead of responding, Bailey's face contorted with a decision that would alter the course of numerous lives. In a motion so unexpected that gasps erupted around the gate area, he gripped Jasmine's passport with both hands and tore it directly down the middle. The ripping sound cut through the gate area like a gunshot. "Oops," Bailey said with unmistakable satisfaction as he dropped the two halves onto the counter. "Looks like this passport is damaged beyond use. Regulations prohibit travel with damaged passports." Time seemed to freeze. Jasmine stared at her destroyed passport, her valid government-issued identification and travel document now rendered useless in an act of deliberate destruction. "You," she began, words momentarily failing her. "You just deliberately destroyed my passport." The shock in her voice resonated through the now silent gate area. Bailey's smile was thin and cruel. "I determined it was fraudulent. Protocol for fraudulent documents." "That's not protocol," Officer Maxwell interjected, clearly alarmed. "Sir, destroying a passport if it's genuine could be a federal offense." "If it's genuine," Bailey emphasized. "I've determined it's not." The crowd's reaction was immediate and vocal. Shouts of, "That's outrageous, and I saw what you did," erupted from multiple directions. "You had no right," Jasmine said, her voice finding strength in anger and disbelief. "No right whatsoever to destroy my property and my legal identification." Bailey reached for his radio again. "I need additional security at Gate B17. Passenger becoming hostile." "She's not hostile, you just destroyed her passport," Amelia Johnson exclaimed from behind Jasmine, unable to remain silent any longer. "We all saw it." Officer Peters turned to his partner, speaking in a low voice. "This is getting out of hand. We need to call this in." Maxwell nodded in agreement, stepping slightly away from Bailey, in a subtle but noticeable shift of allegiance. Jasmine felt simultaneously numb and hyper-aware. As a black woman in America, she had experienced countless aggressions, micro and macro, throughout her life and career. But the sheer brazenness of Bailey's actions, the public destruction of her passport, the smug certainty that he would face no consequences, struck her with particular force. From across the gate area, Terrence Wright, the airline supervisor who had been observing, finally moved forward, his face a careful mask of professional concern. "What's happening here?" he asked, though his eyes suggested he had seen enough. Sir Jasmine addressed him directly, pointing to her destroyed passport. "Your employee just deliberately ripped my passport in half after questioning its authenticity, despite multiple confirmations that it's legitimate." Wright picked up the torn pieces, examining them with growing alarm. "This is—" he paused, searching for words. "This is completely unacceptable." Bailey's confidence faltered for the first time. The document was fraudulent, he insisted, but his voice had lost its edge of authority. I checked this passenger and myself earlier today. A new voice added Sarah Chen, a flight attendant who had approached unnoticed during the commotion. Her documentation was perfectly valid. The situation had crossed a point of no return. What had begun as one more instance of everyday discrimination had escalated into a scene that would soon capture national attention. As passengers continued recording, as security officers radioed for guidance, as airline staff exchanged worried glances, Jasmine stood her ground, refusing to be diminished, despite the violation she had just experienced. In destroying her passport, Bailey had intended to assert final authority. Instead, he had ignited a firestorm that would eventually consume his career and force a reckoning throughout the entire airline industry. The destroyed passport lay in pieces on the counter, physical evidence of the injustice that had just occurred. But something remarkable was happening throughout Gate B-17, a spontaneous coalition forming in real-time, strangers, united by their witness to an undeniable wrong. Sarah Chen, the Asian-American flight attendant who had spoken up, moved to stand beside Jasmine. I saw everything she said quietly. I'm with you. Marcus Diaz, a Latino businessman who had earlier faced his own scrutiny from Bailey, pushed through the crowd. This has gone too far, he announced, addressing the gathering of passengers rather than the airline staff. I travel weekly for work, and I've seen this kind of treatment before, but never this blatant. Karen Fitzgerald, a white mother traveling with her teenage daughter, stepped forward next. My daughter needs to see that we don't stay silent when something like this happens, she said, phone raised to continue recording. This isn't right. What had been individual witnesses were rapidly becoming a collective, their shared outrage transcending the differences that might otherwise have kept them separate in the anonymous space of an airport terminal. Officer Maxwell pulled his partner aside, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. This is going to be a mess. That passport destruction was completely unauthorized. Don't get involved beyond what's required, Peters replied nervously. This is airline jurisdiction now. But the jurisdiction was expanding beyond the airline's control. Passengers were already sharing videos on social media, texting friends and family, calling news outlets. A marketing executive from Chicago tagged 3 major networks in her post. A law student from Georgetown was live tweeting the legal implications of destroying government documents. Number Justice for Jasmine appeared in a tweet, then another, then dozens more. This is absolutely unbelievable. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination at an airport? Comment number 1 if you believe what this gate agent did crosses the line from poor service into something much worse. Are you watching this story unfold from somewhere dealing with similar issues? Hit like and subscribe to see how this shocking situation gets resolved. Should airlines be held accountable when their employees abuse their power? Share your thoughts below. Everyone please, Supervisor Wright attempted to regain control, his voice straining to project authority while avoiding escalation. We're going to resolve this situation. Dr. Washington, if you'll come with me to our customer service office. No, Jasmine replied firmly. Whatever needs to be resolved can happen right here where everyone can witness it. I'm not going anywhere private. Her refusal to be moved out of public view drew nods of approval from the crowd. She understood all too well how injustices thrived in secluded spaces away from accountability. Bailey, increasingly aware of how the situation was spiraling beyond his control, attempted to reassert himself. This disruption is delaying boarding for all passengers. Everyone needs to step back and... You created this disruption when you destroyed her passport, Benjamin Crawford interrupted his lawyer's precision, cutting through Bailey's deflection. The responsibility lies entirely with you and the airline. Security officers Maxwell and Peters, recognizing the growing public relations disaster, called for backup not to control Jasmine, but to establish perimeter control around the increasingly chaotic gate area. Bailey reached for his radio again. I need additional security for crowd control. The situation is becoming unsafe. The only person who made anything unsafe is you, Karen Fitzgerald retorted loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. We all feel perfectly safe with Dr. Washington. It's your actions that are threatening our safety and travel plans. The solidarity was palpable and growing stronger. Jasmine, who had entered the airport that morning as an individual navigating a system never designed with her in mind, now stood at the center of an impromptu community, refusing to accept business as usual. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was having a hushed conversation with several other crew members. "Bailey has done this before," she revealed quietly to Jasmine. "Not tearing passports, but targeting passengers of color. We've reported it, but nothing happens." "That ends today," Jasmine replied, her professional composure returning now that the initial shock had passed. "This isn't just about my passport anymore." Marcus Diaz, checking his phone, let out a low whistle.
"This is exploding online. The videos have thousands of shares already. News crews are on their way."
For Jasmine, the decision point loomed. She could accept whatever private resolution the airline offered, replacement documents, compensation apologies, and proceed with her journey once the situation settled. It would be the path of least resistance, allowing her to make her conference and presentation with minimal further disruption. Or she could stand her ground and demand true accountability, not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced similar treatment, without the benefit of witnesses or viral documentation. The first path was practical. The second was uncertain, exhausting, and potentially futile against entrenched systems. As a successful professional who had navigated white-dominated spaces her entire career, Jasmine was intimately familiar with the calculations of when to fight and when to strategically concede. But looking around at the faces of strangers willing to stand with her, Sarah Chen risking her job, Marcus Diaz delaying his business meeting, Karen Fitzgerald teaching her daughter a lesson in allyship, Benjamin Crawford lending his privilege and legal knowledge, Jasmine felt the weight of responsibility. What would happen, she asked herself silently, if every time something like this occurred, we collectively refused to let it pass? From the periphery, she noticed Terrence Wright watching her closely, his expression suggesting he was asking himself the same question. The gate display changed with a soft electronic chime. Flight 2357 to Paris was now showing a 30-minute delay. It was just the beginning. Do you think more people should speak up when witnessing discrimination, or is it safer to mind your own business? Comment number 1. If you believe bystanders have a responsibility to act, have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to speak up? Drop a like if you've witnessed strangers coming together to stand against injustice. And what do you think will happen next in Jasmine's fight for accountability? Subscribe to find out how this shocking confrontation continues to unfold. Supervisor Terrence Wright stood at a crossroads, both literal and figurative. Positioned between Bailey and the growing coalition supporting Jasmine, he represented the airline's authority while personally understanding the dynamics at play all too well. 20 years in the industry had taught him how to navigate its unwritten rules, including when to look the other way for the sake of career preservation. But this situation had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. "Mr. Bailey Wright," began formally, "I need to see the computer record showing the passport verification failure." Bailey's expression flickered with momentary uncertainty. Systems running slow. The alert was clear, though document inconsistency. "Show me," Wright insisted, moving behind the counter to view Bailey's terminal. Bailey hesitated, then reluctantly adjusted the screen. Wright leaned forward, studying the display carefully. After a moment, his posture stiffened. "There's no alert flag in the system," he stated loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. According to this doctor, Washington's passport was verified successfully during check-in, and again 10 minutes ago at this gate. Bailey's face flushed. "It must have cleared erroneously. I saw the flag earlier." "I'd like to request security camera footage," Jasmine interjected. "That will show exactly what happened here." Bailey's complexion paled visibly. "Camera footage isn't necessary. This is a procedural issue that's being blown out of proportion." "I've already requested the footage," Officer Maxwell stated, surprising everyone. Standard procedure when an incident involves destruction of government documents. The atmosphere shifted as Bailey seemed to grasp fully, perhaps for the first time, the potential consequences of his actions. What had begun as one more exercise of petty power, the kind he'd engaged in countless times before, had escalated beyond containment. His radio crackled. "Bailey, this is operations. What's the situation at B-17? Social media is lighting up with videos from your gate." Before he could respond, a commotion at the terminal entrance drew everyone's attention. A woman with press credentials and a cameraman were attempting to access the gate area, airport security blocking their path. "The media's already here," Marcus Diaz observed, checking his phone. "And number justice for Jasmine is trending nationally. There's footage from 3 different angles showing the passport being destroyed." The hashtag struck Jasmine with unexpected force, a reminder that her private humiliation had become public spectacle. While grateful for the support, part of her recoiled from becoming the latest viral example of racism in America. She had spent her career being recognized for her accomplishments, not her trauma. A new voice cut through the chaos. "What's the delay situation?" Captain Michael Harris had emerged from the jetway, his pilot's uniform commanding immediate attention. "We're 20 minutes from our departure window." Wright quickly approached the captain, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Captain Harris's expression transformed from professional concern to open disbelief as he listened. "A passenger's passport was deliberately destroyed by our gate agent," he confirmed, voice rising with each word. The captain turned to address Jasmine directly. "Dr. Washington, I'm Captain Harris. On behalf of the airline, I want to express my deepest apologies for what you've experienced." His immediate acknowledgement and apology stood in stark contrast to Bailey's defensive posturing. It was a reminder that within any system, individuals still made choices about how to wield their authority. "Thank you, Captain," Jasmine replied. "But I'm concerned about more than just my situation. Your gate agent has shown a pattern of discriminatory behavior that needs addressing." "Pattern?" Captain Harris turned to Wright questioningly. Wright hesitated, 17 years of corporate caution warring with present circumstances. Then, seemingly reaching a decision, he pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I've documented 14 incidents involving Mr. Bailey and passengers of color over the past 8 months," he admitted. "I filed reports through appropriate channels each time." And what came of those reports, Benjamin Crawford asked, attorney's instincts engaged. Wright's silence was answer enough. Bailey, watching his support evaporate, turned desperate. "This is ridiculous. I've been a loyal employee for 17 years. You're all turning against me because of social media pressure." "We're responding to your actions," Captain Harris corrected firmly. "Actions captured on multiple recordings and witnessed by dozens of passengers." The security footage had arrived on Officer Maxwell's tablet. He reviewed it briefly, then showed it to his partner. Both officers exchanged glances before Maxwell approached Jasmine. "Dr. Washington, the footage clearly shows the destruction of your passport was deliberate and unprovoked. You have the right to press charges for destruction of government property and potentially civil rights violations." The legal stakes suddenly crystallized for everyone present. Bailey's face drained of remaining color. "This doesn't need to become a legal matter," he backpedaled rapidly. "The airline can issue emergency travel documents, provide compensation." "You seem eager to resolve this quietly now," Jasmine observed. "Where was this concern for resolution when you were destroying my federal identification?" From the periphery, an elegant man in an expensive suit rushed into the gate area, flanked by airline staff who had been trying unsuccessfully to slow his progress. Leonard Phillips, the airline's CEO, had arrived personally, a testament to how quickly the situation had escalated to crisis level. "I was in D.C. for meetings," he explained breathlessly to Captain Harris and Wright. "What the hell is happening here?" The social media explosion had reached the highest levels of corporate leadership with unprecedented speed. Phillips had received 7 urgent calls in 15 minutes, including one from a board member who had seen the videos on her daughter's Instagram feed. While the CEO received a hurried briefing, Bailey attempted to slip away unnoticed. Officer Peters stepped smoothly into his path. "Sir, I need you to remain here while we sort this out," he said firmly. For Jasmine, watching the corporate machinery suddenly activate at high speed illustrated exactly why the incident had resonated so powerfully. It wasn't just about one destroyed passport or one canceled flight, but about the stark difference between how complaints were handled when they remained isolated individual reports versus when they garnered public witness and documentation. The turning point hadn't come when her passport was destroyed. It had come when destruction occurred in full view with witnesses ready and able to ensure it couldn't be minimized, denied, or swept away. CEO Phillips approached her with practiced crisis management demeanor. Dr. Washington, I'm Leonard Phillips, CEO of Atlantic Airways. I want to personally assure you that what happened today does not reflect our company values or policies. With respect, Mr. Phillips, Jasmine replied steadily. When behavior like this is documented repeatedly without consequence, it very much reflects your company's actual values, regardless of what mission statements claim. Her words landed with visible impact. Phillips, accustomed to controlling narratives, found himself in the unfamiliar position of having no easy path to contain the situation. Captain Harris checked his watch, then made a decision that would ultimately feature prominently in case studies at business schools nationwide. Mr. Phillips, given the circumstances, I'm requesting delay clearance. This flight isn't departing until we properly address what's happened. In that moment, the balance of power shifted decisively. What had begun with one gate agent's discriminatory action had escalated to involve security personnel, become a social media firestorm, drawn media attention, brought in executive leadership, and now threatened to disrupt the airline's entire flight schedule. Bailey's attempt to assert dominance over one passenger had instead revealed the fault lines running through an entire organization and beyond it through society itself. Within 30 minutes of CEO Leonard Phillips's arrival at Gate B-17, the airline's crisis management machine had fully activated. Atlantic Airways headquarters in Chicago resembled a war room, with executives pulled from meetings, legal counsel conferenced in from 3 cities, and the PR team monitoring social media with increasing alarm. The hashtag number Justice for Jasmine has over 200,000 uses already reported. Vanessa Torres, head of social media. Videos of the incident have accumulated more than 2 million views across platforms. Major news networks are picking it up for evening broadcasts. Chief Legal Officer Martin Braddock removed his glasses wearily.
What's our exposure here? Give me worst-case scenario.
Rebecca Liu, his deputy, didn't hesitate. Destruction of government property, civil rights violations, potential hate crime charges if prosecutors want to push it. Civilly, we're looking at discrimination claims, emotional distress, interference with professional obligations, Doctor. Washington is missing an international medical conference where she was scheduled to present groundbreaking research. Jesus, Braddock muttered. It gets worse, Liu continued. If Wright's documentation proves Bailey has a pattern of targeting minority passengers and management was aware but took no corrective action, we're looking at potential class action territory. The executives exchanged grim glances. Atlantic Airways had recently completed a major merger and rebranding campaign centered on diversity and inclusion. Their new slogan, "Your World, Our Wings," was plastered across airports nationwide. The timing couldn't have been worse. Back at Gate B-17, the immediate crisis continued unfolding. Flight 2357 was now officially delayed, passengers updated through the airport announcement system. Some groaned with frustration, but remarkably, the majority seemed to understand the extraordinary circumstances. "They're offering us vouchers," Karen Fitzgerald explained to those around her returning from the customer service counter. "Food and beverages while we wait." "Trying to buy goodwill," Benjamin Crawford observed cynically. "Standard damage control." Alicia Reynolds, the replacement gate agent, sent to take over from Bailey, who had been escorted to a private office, approached Jasmine with visible discomfort. "Dr. Washington, on behalf of Atlantic Airways, I want to extend our sincere apologies for your experience today." She began reciting clearly rehearsed language. "We're prepared to offer immediate compensation in the form of travel vouchers, first-class upgrade on your rescheduled flight, and coverage of any expenses related to your delayed arrival in Paris." Jasmine regarded her thoughtfully. The offer was generous by standard customer service metrics, likely far beyond what most passengers received for travel disruptions. Yet it also represented the corporation's instinctive response. quantify the problem, apply financial solution, contain the damage. I appreciate the offer, Jasmine replied carefully, but my concerns go beyond my individual situation. What's being done about the systematic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place? Reynolds glanced uncertainly toward CEO Phillips, who was engaged in intense conversation with Wright and Captain Harris.
I'm not authorized to discuss broader policy matters, she admitted, but I can assure you this incident is being taken very seriously at the highest levels.
Meanwhile, the airline's damage control efforts extended beyond Gate B-17. In Chicago, senior leadership was discovering troubling patterns in their own data. We ran the numbers based on Wright's claims, explained Darren Williams, from the data analytics team displaying a series of graphs on the conference room screen. Bailey's passport verification rejection rate for passengers of color is 22 times higher than for white passengers, and he's not an outlier. Similar patterns appear across multiple hubs, though less pronounced. The revelation landed heavily in the room. What many had privately dismissed as individual bad apples or isolated incidents now appeared as statistical evidence of systemic problems. Do we have to include this in discovery if litigation proceeds? Asked Timothy Reeves from the General Counsel's office. Are you seriously asking if we should hide potentially discriminatory patterns in our operations? Rebecca Liu countered, visibly appalled. The question hung uncomfortably in the air, exposing the gap between public commitments to diversity and the instinct for corporate self-preservation. Back at the airport, passengers were increasingly divided between those supporting Jasmine's stand and those growing impatient with the delay. I understand principles, but some of us have connections to make, complained a businessman in an expensive suit. Can't she just accept the compensation and let us board? Would you say that if it was your passport that got ripped up? Marcus Diaz challenged him. Some things matter more than convenience. CEO Phillips, recognizing the deteriorating situation, approached Jasmine again. Dr. Washington, I understand your concerns about systemic issues. I'm prepared to commit publicly to a full review of our policies and training procedures regarding passenger documentation verification. It was a carefully crafted response, forward-looking but non-specific, acknowledging issues without admitting liability. Jasmine had heard similar corporate promises throughout her career. That sounds promising, she acknowledged, but what about accountability for what's already happened? Not just to me today, but to everyone documented in Supervisor Wright's reports. Phillips hesitated, the calculation visible in his expression. Admitting prior knowledge of discriminatory patterns could exponentially increase the airline's liability. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the service desk. Bailey had somehow returned to the gate area and was attempting to access his computer terminal, presumably to alter records. Sir, you need to step away from that computer, Officer Maxwell ordered firmly. You've been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I need to complete the flight documentation, Bailey insisted, fingers flying across the keyboard. Standard procedure. Wright moved quickly, using his supervisor credentials to lock the terminal remotely. That won't be necessary, Richard. Bailey's desperate attempt to cover his tracks only reinforced the impression of guilt. Even passengers who had been growing impatient with the delay watched with renewed interest, the human drama overriding their travel frustrations. Alicia Reynolds, witnessing this latest development, approached Jasmine with unexpected candor. For what it's worth, she said quietly, many of us have complained about Bailey before. Nothing ever happened. Her admission was both personal risk and olive branch. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden arrival, a harried young woman from the State Department dispatched at unprecedented speed due to the high-profile nature of the incident. Dr. Washington, I'm Jennifer Keating from the Bureau of Consular Affairs. We've been briefed on your situation and are prepared to issue an emergency replacement passport. The government's rapid response, normally a bureaucratic process requiring days or weeks, underscored how the incident had transcended ordinary customer service issues to become a matter of public interest and diplomatic concern. As the various threads of response converged, corporate, governmental, public, Jasmine found herself at the center of forces far larger than her original travel plans. What should have been a routine boarding process had exposed fault lines running through multiple systems and institutions. Captain Harris approached with an update. The delays pushing against crew time limitations, he explained. If we don't depart within the next hour, regulations will require a crew change, which means likely cancellation. The timeline added urgency to an already tense situation. The corporate machine was racing to contain damage, preserve operations, and limit liability objectives, often at odds with substantive change or true accountability. As emergency meetings continued in Chicago, as lawyers drafted statements and PR teams monitored hashtags, as passengers grew restless, and crew members watched their flight hours tick toward regulatory limits, the fundamental question remained unresolved. Would this incident ultimately represent meaningful change, or would it become one more crisis managed, contained, and ultimately forgotten once public attention moved elsewhere? While chaos unfolded at Gate B17, an ocean away in Paris, Dr. Elise Fontaine frowned at her phone. The Neuroscience Conference Planning Committee had convened for final preparations when news began filtering in about their keynote speaker's situation. "C'est incroyable," she muttered, showing her phone to colleagues. They destroyed her passport. Within minutes, the conference's official Twitter account posted, "We stand with Dr. Jasmine Washington. Number Black Doctors Matter, number Justice for Jasmine." The medical community, often hesitant to engage with political controversies, recognized discrimination against one of their own. The hashtag number Black Doctors Matter began trending alongside number Justice for Jasmine, broadening the conversation beyond one incident to the larger issues of representation and treatment of Black professionals across fields. Back at BWI Airport, this international support reached Jasmine through Marcus Diaz, who had been monitoring social media developments. "Your colleagues in Paris are rallying for you," he informed her, displaying his phone screen. "The conference is postponing your keynote rather than replacing you." This gesture of solidarity, choosing disruption over convenient replacement, touched Jasmine deeply. Throughout her career, she had experienced the double burden of pioneering achievement and graceful acceptance of obstacles her white colleagues never faced. The public recognition of this inequity represented a subtle but significant power shift. As word spread, additional passengers from other gates began drifting toward B17, drawn by the increasingly historic nature of the confrontation. Airport authorities concerned about crowding established a perimeter, inadvertently creating a visual distinction between those inside Gate B17, now participants in a civil rights moment, and curious onlookers. CEO Leonard Phillips, recognizing the escalating situation, made a calculated decision. "We need to get ahead of this narrative," he told his crisis team. "I'm going to personally address the passengers." Phillips had built his career on charm and strategic empathy. As Atlantic Airways' first Black CEO, he navigated complex racial dynamics daily, positioning himself as progressive enough for younger employees, while reassuring old guard executives he wouldn't rock the boat excessively. The delicate balance had served his career well, but left him vulnerable to accusations of tokenism from critics. Now that carefully cultivated middle ground was collapsing beneath his feet, Bailey's actions had forced a binary choice between accountability and containment. Phillips boarded the aircraft using the PA system to address all passengers simultaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Leonard Phillips, CEO of Atlantic Airways. I want to personally apologize for the delay you're experiencing and explain the extraordinary circumstances." He continued with a carefully worded acknowledgement of the incident, describing it as deeply concerning behavior that contradicts our values without explicitly admitting discrimination or liability. "We're working to resolve this situation expeditiously," he concluded. "Your patience is greatly appreciated during this unusual circumstance." As Phillips deplaned, he was met with a distinctly cool reception. His corporate language and emphasis on resolving the flight delay rather than addressing the underlying injustice struck many as tone-deaf. "That's your response. Concern about a delay," Benjamin Crawford challenged him directly. "A federal document was deliberately destroyed in an act of blatant discrimination." That's not an unusual circumstance. It's potentially criminal. Phillips bristled, visibly unaccustomed to such direct confrontation. Sir, I understand your concerns. We're taking appropriate action. What appropriate action? Karen Fitzgerald interjected. Bailey tried to delete security footage. Is he being terminated or just moved to another gate where cameras might not catch him next time? The direct questioning from multiple passengers, emboldened by their collective witness, forced Phillips beyond rehearsed corporate responses. This power shift from institutional authority to community accountability was precisely what made the moment so significant. Meanwhile, airport security had made a startling discovery. Sir Officer Maxwell approached Wright discreetly. We've accessed Bailey's employee messaging history. There's evidence he's done this before, not just profiling, but document interference. And it appears he has a connection to your regional VP, Thomas Harrington. They're brothers-in-law. Wright's expression revealed no surprise, only grim confirmation. That explains why my reports went nowhere. This revelation of nepotism, protecting discriminatory behavior, represented another piece of the institutional puzzle. The problem wasn't just individual bias, but systems designed to shield certain actors from consequences. As these dynamics unfolded, Jasmine received a choice that would define the incident's legacy. Jennifer Keating from the State Department approached with emergency passport documentation accompanied by the airline's chief counsel who had arrived from Washington. Dr. Washington, the lawyer began. We're prepared to offer a confidential settlement agreement that includes compensation for your inconvenience, replacement of damaged property, and coverage of any professional consequences from your delayed arrival. Keating, representing government rather than corporate interests, provided necessary context. You should understand that accepting a private settlement typically includes non-disclosure provisions that would prevent public discussion of both the incident and resolution. The choice was stark private remedy with financial compensation, but silenced voice or public accountability with uncertain outcome and potential backlash. It was a familiar crossroads for victims of systemic injustice, personal relief versus collective progress. Before Jasmine could respond, Captain Harris approached with urgency. We've hit our time limit. By FAA regulations, this crew can no longer operate this flight today. The implications were immediate. Flight 2357 would be officially canceled, stranding nearly 300 passengers. The disruption would cascade through the system, affecting connections, creating costs, and inconveniencing people who had nothing to do with the original incident. Phillips received this news with visible alarm. A delayed flight was a manageable problem. A canceled international flight represented significant financial and reputational damage. His leverage was rapidly diminishing. Dr. Washington, he addressed Jasmine with new urgency. We need to resolve this situation immediately. Name your terms. This direct inversion of power, the CEO of a major airline essentially asking for terms from a wronged passenger, captured the attention of everyone within earshot. The institutional representative was now appealing to the individual rather than dictating conditions. Jasmine recognized the moment for what it was. This isn't about my terms, she replied steadily. This is about accountability and change. I don't want special treatment. I want equal treatment for everyone. As if to underscore her point, the final announcement echoed through the terminal. Atlantic Airways regrets to inform passengers that Flight 2357 to Paris has been canceled due to crew time limitations. Please proceed to customer service for rebooking options. The collective groan that rose from the gate area contained frustration, but remarkably little anger directed at Jasmine. Something had shifted in the hours since Bailey destroyed her passport. Through social media documentation, press coverage, and direct witness, passengers had moved from viewing the incident as one woman's problem to recognizing it as a manifestation of systemic issues that ultimately affected everyone. You know what? Said a businessman who had earlier complained about the delay. My meeting can wait. Some things are more important. This sentiment, prioritizing justice over convenience, collective welfare over individual interest, represented the most profound power shift of all. The airline, despite all its resources and institutional authority, found itself accountable to a new form of power distributed, documented, and democratized through technology and witness. As passengers reluctantly gathered belongings and prepared to seek rebooking options, Captain Harris made an unexpected announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, the crew of Flight 2357 wants you to know something. We stand with Dr. Washington. This flight isn't going anywhere until this is resolved properly, not just for her, but for all our passengers who deserve equal treatment. The spontaneous applause that followed marked the moment when individual incident became collective cause. The power had decisively shifted. The canceled flight status flashed on departure boards throughout BWI Airport, triggering a cascade of consequences. Within minutes, the FAA became officially involved due to the extended tarmac delay. Customer service lines stretched through the terminal as displaced passengers sought rebooking options. Social media continued to amplify the situation, with major news networks now broadcasting live from outside the security perimeter. For Atlantic Airways, the operational nightmare was compounded by unprecedented public scrutiny. The company that had carefully cultivated an image of progressive corporate values now found itself the focal point of a national conversation about racial discrimination. The FAA wants an explanation for the tarmac delay violation, reported an increasingly stressed operations manager to CEO Phillips. That's a potential $27,500 fine per passenger. The financial implications were staggering, but the reputational damage threatened to be incalculable. Phillips, who had built his career navigating corporate politics with strategic caution, found himself forced into decisive action by circumstances beyond his control. As these pressures mounted, Richard Bailey made an unexpected and ill-advised return to Gate B-17. Having evaded his administrative escort, he appeared suddenly in the gate area, face flushed with a volatile mixture of defiance and desperation. "This has gone too far," he announced, loudly drawing immediate attention. "I was following procedure. This is a witch hunt." Security officers Maxwell and Peters moved quickly to intercept him, but not before Bailey launched into a self-justifying monologue that would later be described by witnesses as career suicide in real time. "I've worked for this airline for 17 years, he continued, voice rising. "I've seen standards dropped, protocols ignored. These passengers," he gestured dismissively toward several black and brown travelers, "they always expect special treatment." The naked prejudice in his statement sent shockwaves through the gate area. Phones recorded his every word, capturing undeniable evidence of the discriminatory attitude that had motivated his actions toward Jasmine. "Sir, you need to come with us now," Officer Maxwell stated, firmly gripping Bailey's arm. "Get your hands off me, Bailey," snapped, jerking away with unexpected aggression. "You're only doing this because she's playing the race card. It's all a setup." His words hung in the air, revealing the defensive logic that so often accompanies exposed discrimination, the belief that acknowledging racism is somehow more problematic than racism itself. Supervisor Wright, who had been consulting with the airline's emergency response team, approached with calm authority. "Richard, you're making this much worse for yourself. Please come with the officers." "Of course you take her side," Bailey sneered, turning on Wright. "You people always stick together." The mask had fully dropped. What had begun as a procedural dispute about documentation had revealed itself as unambiguous racial animus. The gasps from onlookers confirmed the breaking point had been reached. There was no longer any plausible deniability or corporate language that could obscure the reality of what had occurred. As security finally removed Bailey from the terminal, CEO Phillips stood ashen-faced, witnessing the demolition of every carefully constructed narrative about the incident being an isolated lapse in judgment rather than evidence of broader problems. Meanwhile, the airline's crisis response team had made a disturbing discovery. Security footage showed Bailey attempting to delete not just the day's video record, but accessing Wright's personnel file as well, apparently seeking to discredit the supervisor who had documented his pattern of behavior. This revelation of attempted evidence tampering shifted the situation from a customer service disaster to potential criminal territory. Atlantic Airways' legal department now faced the uncomfortable position of potentially having to cooperate with law enforcement against their own employee. "We need to get ahead of this," urged Rebecca Liu from legal. "If we wait for subpoenas, it looks like we're hiding something. We should voluntarily disclose the evidence tampering attempt to authorities." Her recommendation represented a significant departure from standard corporate crisis management, which typically prioritized information control and damage limitation. But the circumstances had moved beyond conventional playbooks. At Gate B-17, Jasmine found herself at the center of a situation that had expanded far beyond her original travel plans. The emergency passport documentation provided by Jennifer Keating would allow her to travel once flights resumed, but the question of how to respond to the airline's settlement offer remained. As she considered her options, Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had supported her, initially approached with new information. "Dr. Washington," she began quietly, "there's something you should know. Bailey has powerful connections in the company. His brother-in-law is Regional VP Thomas Harrington. That's why Supervisor Wright's reports never went anywhere." This revelation of nepotism protecting discriminatory behavior added another dimension to the systemic nature of the problem. It wasn't simply individual bias, but institutional structures that perpetuated inequality. "There's more," Chen continued. "Some of us have been documenting these incidents for years, forming our own support network because official channels didn't work. We have records of at least 37 similar situations across multiple airports. The existence of this underground documentation, employees creating their own accountability systems when official ones failed, represented both a damning indictment of corporate culture and a powerful resource for potential reform." As these conversations unfolded, CEO Phillips finally recognized the futility of conventional damage control. The breaking point had been reached not just for Bailey, but for the entire approach to addressing discrimination within the organization. Phillips requested to speak with Jasmine privately, but she again declined, insisting that transparency was non-negotiable given the circumstances. Instead, they spoke in a corner of the gate area still within view of witnesses, including Benjamin Crawford, who continued recording. Dr. Washington Phillips began visibly struggling to maintain his executive composure. "I want to speak honestly, not as CEO, but as someone who understands what you've experienced today." For the first time, he abandoned corporate language and spoke personally. "I've been in your position, not exactly, but close enough. The difference is, when it happened to me, there were no cameras, no witnesses willing to speak up, no social media to amplify what occurred." This unexpected vulnerability, the Black executive acknowledging his own experiences with discrimination while simultaneously representing the institution perpetuating it, illustrated the complex intersection of individual identity and systemic power. "So here's what I'm proposing," Phillips continued. "Not a settlement with NDAs, but a collaboration. We need to address this systemically. Would you be willing to work with us on comprehensive reform of our training policies and accountability structures?" The offer was unprecedented, moving beyond financial compensation to structural change, from containing the incident to learning from it. Yet Jasmine remained cautious, aware of how corporate promises often evaporate once public attention shifts. "What happens to Supervisor Wright?" she asked. And Sarah Chen and everyone else who spoke up despite risks to their jobs. "Protection and recognition," Phillips promised. "No retaliation and proper acknowledgement of their integrity." And Bailey. Phillips didn't hesitate. Immediate termination with documentation of cause shared with the industry. He won't work in aviation again. These concrete commitments, rather than vague assurances about reviewing policies, suggested Phillips had indeed reached his own breaking point, recognizing that meaningful change required more than crisis management language. As they concluded their conversation, a flight attendant approached with her phone extended. "Dr. Washington, your medical colleagues in Paris are requesting to speak with you." On the video call, conference organizers and fellow neurosurgeons expressed solidarity, confirming they had rescheduled her keynote presentation and arranged accommodation adjustments. Their support, practical, emotional, and public, reinforced that this incident had resonated far beyond one airport gate. With international attention, regulatory scrutiny, internal documentation, and public witness all converging, Atlantic Airways faced an inflection point. The breaking point had been reached, not through a single dramatic moment, but through the accumulated weight of exposed truths, each revealing another facet of how discrimination functioned within systems designed to minimize and contain it. As evening fell and the airport operations began to normalize, Jasmine delivered an impromptu address to the remaining passengers from Flight 2357, many of whom had chosen to stay despite rebooking options being available. What happened today wasn't just about a destroyed passport, she told them. It was about who is questioned and who is believed, who faces scrutiny and who receives the benefit of the doubt. These differences shape lives in ways both dramatic and subtle. Her words, captured and shared across platforms, articulated what many had witnessed, but struggled to name the everyday manifestations of systemic inequality that occasionally become visible enough to demand collective response. I never wanted to be the center of this kind of situation, she concluded. But now that we're here, I'm committed to ensuring it leads to meaningful change, not just for me, but for everyone who travels through these terminals. The spontaneous applause that followed marked the final breaking point, the moment when individual incident fully transformed into movement for systemic change. 1 month later, Jasmine Washington stood at a podium in Paris, the elegant conference hall of the International Neurosurgical Society filled to capacity. Her delayed keynote presentation on neural regeneration techniques had become one of the most anticipated medical addresses of the year, not just for its scientific content, but for the speaker's unexpected journey to the stage. Before I discuss our research findings, she began, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that delayed this presentation. What began as a traumatic incident has evolved into something unexpected, a catalyst for change that extends far beyond one airport gate or one passenger's experience. In the months since the confrontation at BWI, developments had unfolded with remarkable speed. The emergency passport issued through the State Department's expedited process had allowed Jasmine to travel to Paris just 3 days after the original incident with Atlantic Airways, providing private transportation as part of their comprehensive response. Richard Bailey had been terminated with cause his separation paperwork explicitly documenting the destruction of federal documents and discriminatory conduct. More significantly, his brother-in-law, Thomas Harrington, had resigned after internal investigation revealed his role in suppressing multiple discrimination complaints. The nepotism that had protected Bailey's behavior for years had finally collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. But the most substantial changes extended beyond individual personnel actions. Atlantic Airways, recognizing that the incident had exposed fundamental flaws in their systems, had taken unprecedented steps toward institutional reform. CEO Leonard Phillips, leveraging the crisis into opportunity, had established the Passenger Equity Initiative with a $50 million commitment over 5 years. The program included comprehensive retraining for all customer-facing staff, revisions to documentation, verification procedures, and most significantly, an independent oversight committee with authority to review complaints and recommend binding remedial actions. Jasmine herself had directed the airline's settlement funds, which she had ultimately accepted without non-disclosure provisions, toward establishing the Washington Foundation for Equity in Medicine, focusing on supporting minority students pursuing healthcare careers, and addressing systemic barriers to advancement. Sometimes, she told the assembled medical professionals in Paris, our most important contributions come not from our planned work, but from how we respond when obstacles appear in our path. After her presentation received a standing ovation, Jasmine met privately with a group of young Black medical students who had been specifically invited to the conference through a newly created scholarship program. Their eyes reflected both admiration and recognition, seeing in her story both exceptional circumstances and painfully familiar dynamics. The most important thing to understand, she told them, is that standing up doesn't always feel heroic in the moment. Often it's terrifying, exhausting, and comes with no guarantee of positive outcome. But sometimes it's necessary not just for yourself, but for everyone who will walk the same path after you. Back in the United States, the ripple effects continued. Terrence Wright had been promoted to head of customer experience at Atlantic Airways with explicit authority to implement anti-discrimination policies across all operations. His years of careful documentation, once ignored by superiors, now formed the foundation for systemic reforms across the airline. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had risked her position to speak truth, now served on the airline's newly formed diversity committee, alongside other staff members who had previously created underground support networks to document discrimination when official channels failed. For the broader aviation industry, the incident had triggered a reassessment of documentation verification procedures across multiple airlines. The Department of Transportation had issued updated guidelines emphasizing non-discriminatory application of security protocols with specific training requirements for all gate agents. As Jasmine prepared to return to Baltimore after the successful conference, she received an unexpected message from Benjamin Crawford, the retired attorney who had recorded and advocated during the original confrontation. "Thought you might want to see this," his message read with an attached video link. The clip showed Richard Bailey being interviewed outside an unemployment office, clearly unaware he was being recorded by a local news station doing a story on job seekers. "It's unfair," Bailey complained to the reporter. "I lost everything because of her. 17 years of service, gone, because some doctor couldn't handle being questioned like everyone else." The reporter, recognizing Bailey from the viral videos, pressed further. "But multiple witnesses and security footage showed you destroyed her passport, which is a federal document." Bailey's expression darkened. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. These people come through with documentation that needs extra verification. I was trying to protect the system." "These people," the reporter questioned. "You know what I mean," Bailey responded defensively. "And now she's probably got some scholarship or special treatment because of it. Meanwhile, I can't even get an interview. She ruined my life because I was doing my job." The revealing interview exposing Bailey's unchanged attitudes, even after the consequences of his actions, demonstrated why individual punitive measures alone could never address systemic problems. His worldview, in which enforcing extra verification on certain passengers was justified, and facing consequences for discrimination constituted victimization, remained intact despite everything that had occurred. This glimpse into Bailey's perspective provided unexpected insight. In a private journal entry that evening, Jasmine reflected on what she had learned about the origins of Bailey's prejudice. Through information that emerged during the airline's investigation, it was revealed that Bailey had once applied to medical school himself only to be rejected, while several minority candidates with slightly lower test scores were accepted through diversity initiatives. Rather than recognizing these programs as partial corrections to systemic barriers, Bailey had internalized a narrative of personal victimhood that festered over decades, eventually manifesting as discriminatory behavior towards successful Black professionals like Jasmine, whose very existence challenged his belief that minority success came only through unfair advantage. Understanding the roots of Bailey's prejudice didn't excuse his actions, but illuminated how personal grievance often fuels systemic discrimination, and why addressing the problem required more than just removing individual bad actors from positions of authority. As Jasmine boarded her return flight to Baltimore, upgraded to first class by Atlantic Airways as part of their ongoing apology, she noticed something significant. The crew, diverse in ethnicity and gender, greeted her by name with genuine warmth rather than the perfunctory recognition typically offered to premium passengers. Dr. Washington, the lead flight attendant, said quietly as she settled into her seat, "I just wanted to say thank you. Things are different now." This simple acknowledgement from someone she had never met but whose daily work experience had been impacted by the ripple effects of that confrontation at Gate B-17 represented the most meaningful measure of resolution. The flight departed on time, carrying Jasmine back to her regular life and responsibilities. Yet, as the aircraft lifted into clear skies, she understood that sometimes having your journey disrupted puts you on a better path, not just for yourself, but for everyone who follows. In that knowledge lay both resolution of what had passed and beginning of what might yet come. Jasmine's story teaches us that meaningful change often requires uncomfortable confrontations. When Bailey destroyed her passport, she faced a pivotal choice: accept private compensation or demand public accountability. By choosing the latter, she catalyzed institutional reform that benefited countless others. True justice extends beyond individual remedy to systemic transformation. The witnesses who recorded the incident, passengers who stood in solidarity, and employees who risked their positions all demonstrated how collective action overwhelms institutional resistance. Bailey's prejudice revealed how personal grievance often fuels discrimination, showing why addressing bias requires more than removing bad actors. Most importantly, Jasmine's experience reminds us that documentation, witnesses, and technology have democratized power, allowing individuals to hold systems accountable. When we stand firm against injustice, our disrupted journeys can create better paths for everyone who follows. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered whether to speak up? Was there a time when someone stood up for you when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. If Jasmine's courage inspired you, hit that like button to help more people discover her powerful journey. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about everyday heroes fighting injustice and creating lasting change. And please share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters in the fight against discrimination. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one woman's extraordinary stand against injustice. Remember, sometimes our most important contributions come not from our planned work, but from how we respond when obstacles appear in our path.